Just like the wave sheaf offering has a direct connection to Pentecost, not so much the days of unleavened bread as much as it does to Pentecost, so the story of Ruth has a direct connection to the wave sheaf offering and the Pentecost. It's interesting because the concepts of a redeemer is associated to this. There is the gleaning and the harvest of the fields. The barley is the season for which the harvest is of in the book of Ruth. When we consider the book of Ruth, there's a couple of things just from a contextual perspective I think we need to get in our heads. It occurred during the time of the Judges. And of course we know that was a time for which there was religious and morals ups and downs, so to speak. There were times when they did really well, the Israelites, and there were times when they did woefully bad. There was all kinds of national disunity. It was often a time of foreign oppression. Sound similar? Seems like sometimes we've gone through that as a nation, but that is definitely what we see in the context of the overall book of Judges. In the book of Ruth, it's a period of time for which there is a temporary peace. And there is a temporary peace between Israel and Moab. The book of Ruth is a glimpse into a personal life of one particular family of that period. And it is interesting that Ruth is not of the genealogy of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Ruth is a foreigner, so to speak. But Ruth is a very important person in the coming of Jesus Christ because she is added, as we see in Matthew chapter 1, verses 5 through 6, as being the great-grandmother of David. And we know David was a part of the line that led all the way to Jesus Christ. We see there, even in Ruth, a story, a heroine. We see in Ruth, something for us to consider about the way we live our lives. We see a woman that we can look up to, a woman of character. This book is oftentimes read by many during the Pentecost season because of the timing, set as a result of being after the wave sheaf offering and its agricultural connection to Pentecost, because the wave sheaf and Pentecost are attached to each other. And it's important that the book of Ruth is a carrying out, or in some regards, an act, a play that is the totality of what we even see in the overall redemption story of the wave sheaf offering and Pentecost itself. As I said before, it's during the barley harvest that begins right after the wave sheaf offering is made, the day after the Sabbath, and we see that it is the counting of the days that would ultimately lead to the new grain offering that would be made during the time of the Pentecost. Another aspect is that Ruth stays very close to the maidens of Boaz during the gleaning. And we read about that earlier in Leviticus 23 when God gave instruction. And the instruction was, do not, when you harvest your fields, take everything. No, leave the corners for the poor. There was a bit of a welfare system for the poor, a way in which they could actually get out, and they had to, again, it wasn't just handed to them. They had to go out and get it. But there was a system set up, a societal system, to support even those who were down on their luck, so to speak, going through a difficult time. And we see that Ruth is a woman who is faithful. She is faithful to her mother Naomi. And we see in there a lesson for us of how we are to be faithful in the way that we live our lives. I mentioned earlier that the wheat harvest is the harvest at Pentecost, and the 50 days that would occur following the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath, and the counting as it goes from the wave sheaf offering forward. And we see that it's a story, as we read through this, that is very germane. Now, a couple of things that we see here, and this is just an outline of different aspects of the book, and we'll read through portions of the book. I don't know that we need to read through the entirety of the book, but there are things for us to consider, even as a result of the manner and time that they lived. In this particular time, if a man died without any offspring, then his closest male kin would marry his widow and bear hopefully a son, and there were all kinds of economic inheritance properties as it related to the handing down of wealth in generations. So it was important to have offspring. It was important to know that just because in that particular culture and society, if a woman lost her husband and didn't have any offspring, there was still a way. Now, you can say it'd be kind of weird based on our society to go and marry your brother-in-law. I don't know. But that was a cultural context of this as well. And there is a redeeming aspect of that. There's also, if someone went into debt, they had the ability to sell their land to the nearest relative, and then they could, in time, buy it back. And, of course, we know that through the year of Jubilee. And it is interesting. I was working on another message for today, and it just wasn't really coming together. And I had this in my mind as well that I wanted to get to this year. And so I thought, I'm just going to do it right now. But when we start talking about the counting of the 7 weekly Sabbaths, there is connection to the counting of the years of release that are outlined in the book of Leviticus, and there's also the counting towards the year of Jubilee, which is the 50th year. And there's a release from all of the and bad decisions in some cases, and or results of bad events, things that just happen sometimes, time and chance. And we also see that there's a connection here to elders sitting in the city, elders, people in the community being a part of making decisions and, as we would say today, consummating deals, consummating the fact that things were done appropriately and correctly. Today, we might look at that as you're going down to the courthouse and you are, probating a will, you are doing whatever to legally make sure everything is done correctly. Their society was a little bit differently, but had some of the same context. Things had to be done decent and in order, as the Apostle Paul would even reference to the church, that everything is to be done decent and in order. So let's turn into Ruth chapter 1. I'm going to read the first 6 verses here. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man from Bethlehem in Judea with his wife and 2 sons, who went to reside in the land of Moab. And the man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites from Benjamin and Judah. And they entered the land of Moab and settled there." So because of the famine, they just moved over to the next country. Now, obviously, there had to be some kind of peace there. And we know it wasn't always peaceful between Israel and Moab during this time, but during that time it was. So they crossed the border, so to speak. When Naomi's husband, Elimelech, died, she was left with her 2 sons, who took Moabite women for their wives, one named Ephraim and the other named Ruth. And after they had lived in Moab about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. And I think, again, based on that time, there's an issue there that perhaps goes past our ability to understand, because culturally, that was a huge, devastating loss. There was no one to take care of her from an economic standpoint. Verse 6, "When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had attended to his people by providing with them food, she and her daughters-in-laws prepared to leave the land of Moab. Accompanied by her 2 daughters-in-laws, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road leading back to the land of Judea." Of course, in verses 8 through 16, we see that she implored her 2 daughter-in-laws just to stay there, make more, or get remarried again, so that they could be taken care of from an economic and cultural standpoint. She pushed on them to stay. Ephraim did stay, but Ruth would not. In fact, Naomi finally said, "Listen, I'm too old. I'm not going to get married, but even if I did," I'm paraphrasing, "I'm too old to have children. So there's not going to be any more that I'm going to be able to give you. So you need to just stay." But Ruth just hung on. In fact, verse 16 says that Ruth told her Do not urge me to leave or turn from following you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God, most importantly, will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me, she goes on to say, and I am reading from the the Beroan Standard, if anything but death separates you from me. I read that because that is, I think, something we can learn from Ruth. Every one of us, regardless of gender, we need that kind of dedication. Ruth had that towards Naomi. We need to have that kind of dedication to God. You know, we can learn much from Ruth and the way she conducted herself as a woman of integrity that every one of us, regardless of our gender, we can learn. When Naomi saw in verse 18 that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped trying to persuade her. You know, that is one of those things where I'm not saying that God tries to dissuade us. All I'm saying is that sometimes we may have relationships interpersonally who will try to get us to go away from God. But this shows a determined spirit, a determined person to not turn aside. Verse 19, so Naomi and Ruth traveled until they came to Bethlehem, and they entered Bethlehem. The whole town was stirred because of them. Of the women of the town exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Which leads you to think that perhaps Naomi was an honorable woman, because after 10 years, would people remember you? If you moved back into a neighborhood after 10 years, have you made an impact on anyone such that if you moved back to your neighborhood that they were like, we're so glad you came back? Just a thought. Verse 20, and she said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because my Almighty has dealt quite bitterly with me, and went away, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi after all? The Lord has testified against me. The Almighty has afflicted me. You know, she came back in a worse economic state than she left. Verse 22 say, Naomi returned from the land of Moab with her daughter-in-law Ruth the Moabite, and they arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley season. So we see the connection to the wave sheaf and the process of the first harvest that would have occurred in Israel during that time. So obviously there's a couple of things I have here listed about the famine in the land. You know, God allowed the famine to occur. Sometimes God allows bad things around us to put us in situations that we are uncomfortable with, but then brings us back to better conditions, better things in life. You know, I can't give an answer for every bad thing that happens in our lives, and I can't give an answer for every bad thing that happens in the world. But I do know this: if we put our trust and confidence in the Heavenly Father through Jesus Christ and have that kind of relationship that Ruth had with Naomi, it will come back to something better in time. When we may not always understand and see, but if we put our trust, it will ultimately. And God works out plans. I mean, I'm pretty sure that, the introduction of a Gentile into the royal line of Jesus Christ wasn't in the game plan for most people. But God works in ways that we don't, and that's important for us to understand. Let's go on to chapter 2. Here, we'll read this entire chapter for the most part. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a prominent man, a noble character of the clan of Elimelech. And of course, we're already told that this is a good man. He had a noble character. And his name was Boaz. We have a town in Alabama named Boaz. I don't know if they did that on purpose or not, but whatever. Verse 2, and Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, let me go into the fields and glean the heads of grain after someone in whose sight I may have found favor. This is a part of what we were reading earlier, a part of the economic system for those that were, in poverty, those who had been in a bad way, whether it was through personal decisions or whether it was through time and chance. There was a way in which people could still be fed. They had to go out and do something, but they could still be fed. And it kept people from becoming greedy as well, if they actually followed these gleaning rules that we read about earlier in Leviticus 23. "Go ahead, my daughter," Naomi replied. So Ruth departed and went out into the field and gleaned after the harvesters. And she happened to come into the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and said to the harvesters, "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they replied. And so we see here a gracious man. He's not, a miser. He's not a hard-hearted, let me just build more barns to put more of my stuff in. He's giving to people. He has a giving heart. And Boaz asked in verse 5, the foreman of the harvesters, "Who's the young woman there?" And the foreman answered, "She's a Moabite who's returned with Naomi from the land of Moab. She has said, 'Please let me glean and gather from the sheaves after the harvesters.' So she came out, and she's continued from morning until now, except that she rested a short time in the shelter." And that's another, I think, character trait we see in Ruth, that we need to understand. She was a worker, a doer, not a sitting back and letting other people bring everything to her. She went out and did. Again, regardless of gender, we all learn from that. Verse 8, "Then Boaz said to Ruth, 'Listen, my daughter, do not go and glean in any other field, and do not go away from this place, but stay here close to my servant's girls. Let your eyes be on the field that they are harvesting, and follow along after these girls. Indeed, I have ordered the young men not to touch you.'" And apparently, when Boaz spoke, people listened. There was something that was carried, a weight to his words, to the others there. "And when you are thirsty, go and drink from the jars of the young men that they have filled." In other words, he's even being gracious to her, not knowing who she is wholly right now, but he's going and being gracious to her and adding to the generosity, which is a part of the wave sheaf offering, being generous and giving to God, and then allowing God to give back in ways greater. Verse 10, "After this she fell on her face, bowing low to the ground, and said to him, 'Why have I found such favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, even as I am a foreigner?'" She was humble in spirit. Again, something each one of us should learn from. Boaz replied, "I've been made fully aware of all you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of her husband. How you left your father and mother in the land of your birth, and how you came to the people who you do not know. May the Lord repay your work, and may you receive a rich reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have taken refuge." You can see all kinds of imagery right there, relative to God's protective hedge, relative to this man being someone that is a protector, someone who is a blesser, a benevolent person. You see in him someone who recognizes what people have sacrificed and what they've done for others. We see parallels to him. He's not Jesus Christ, but as parallels to him, as we'll see, as a redeemer much later. Verse 13, "My Lord," she said, "may I continue to find favor in your eyes, for you have comforted and spoken kindly to your maiden servant, though I'm not like one of your servant girls. I'm an outcast. I don't have standing here, yet you're still being kind to me." Verse 14, "And after mealtime, Boaz said to her, 'Come over here, have some bread, and dip it in the vinegar sauce.' So that she sat down beside the harvesters, and he offered her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left over. And then Ruth got up to glean, and Boaz ordered his young men, 'Even if she gathers among the sheaves, do not insult her. Rather, pull out from her some stalks of the bundles and leave them for her to gather. Do not rebuke her.'" In other words, he's going above and beyond, like Jesus Christ would go above and beyond for us. But he's going above and beyond for her. Not only is she just picking up the scraps left behind, but he's telling them, throw out some of the good stuff and let her get that, and don't say a word to her. Do we see parallels? Continuing on in verse 17, "So Ruth gathered in the field until evening, and when she beat out what had been gleaned, we talked about the beating out process of the barley. She had about an ephah of barley, and she picked up the grain and went into the town where her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought out what she'd saved for her meal and gave to Naomi. So she's a giving person. She didn't eat just everything that had been given to her. She also saved enough to give to Naomi. Again, showing a character trait that all of us can learn from. Verse 19, then her mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? And where did you work? Blessed be the man who noticed you. Obviously, whatever she brought back, Naomi knew that it was more than just the average kindness. So she told her mother-in-law, who she'd worked, in the name of the man that I worked with today is Boaz, she said. And then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, who has not withdrawn his kindness from the living or the dead. Naomi continued, the man is a close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers. That was important. Do you think that she just stumbled into that field, or do you think God led her? I would say the latter. I think God led her to that particular field. And I think that was an important aspect of this story, how God leads us if we follow the way. Verse 21, then Ruth, the Moabite, said, he also told me, stay with the young men until they have finished gathering all the harvest. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, Ruth, my daughter, this is good for you to work with his young women, so that until nothing will happen, until upon you in another field. So Ruth stayed there with the servants' girls of Boaz and gleaned grain until the barley and the wheat harvest were finished. So there is more than just the barley. Ruth continued all the way into the wheat harvest. So we would say roughly, we don't know exactly, but if there's 50 days to the Pentecost, so there was 7 complete Sabbaths, 7 weeks of doing this. It was an extended period of time. And she continued to live with her mother-in-law. She didn't forsake her. Even though she was being blessed in a very powerful way, she never once forsaked Naomi. Character trait. Something you and I can all learn from. It is interesting when you look at names. I realize sometimes today we don't necessarily think of the meaning of the names when we name children, but Elimelech means God is king. Boaz means in him is strength. And it is interesting that, it says her chance changed in verse 3. This is a literal translation version. Upon the portion of the field belonging to Boaz. It's almost like there was God leading her to this particular field. And as we might say today, her circumstances improved greatly as a result of that. They had been in dire straits. They had struggled. They had suffered for a long time. And even though they were going through difficult times, and even though they experienced hardships, we have no idea what kind of life necessarily that, the sons lived when they were in Moab, but we just know that it was difficult, and we see that God was very gracious and pointing her in the right ways. We know, obviously, Jesus was from Bethlehem. Interesting that the word Bethlehem means house of the bread, house of war. And we see that, bread of life, manna. We see that with the return as a warrior king later. And it is interesting that even Jesus' name means God is with you, Emmanuel. And, again, I don't think these things just are happen chance. I think these things are there for a reason, for us to think about. Again, Ruth was not Israelite. She was a foreigner. She was not of that line that everyone else later would look down upon in the form of the Sadducees, Pharisees, and scribes. Calling some of those individuals dogs and not having anything to do with them. Again, the gleaning and the gathering among the sheaves, we talked about that. We see the humility. We see, again, the characteristics that Ruth demonstrates, and then we see tremendous blessings being given to her from Boaz. These things, again, are part of the story, essential elements, things that I want to call out and make sure that we consider, and how important it is for us to stay the course in the right directions. You know, she was told to stay in that field, glean where these particular people were, and it was an extra blessing. And, you know, I have a couple of scriptures here, Luke 6:38, about, you know, how if we give to God, then he will give back to us good measure, pressed down. You know, that a lot of that is hyperbole, but it's just to say if you give to God, you will be given back things that you can't calculate, you can't measure. More than you give will be given back to you. And then we see in Ephesians 3, verses 14 through 21, you know, it's for this reason that I bow my knees before the Father, for whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. And he will grant us according to the riches of his glory. You know, that is, I think, we see, again, a play being worked out on the stage of God's plan. Let's go now over to chapter 3 of Ruth. Verse 1, one day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "Daughter, should I not seek a resting place for you?" In other words, you've been very kind to me. I'm going to look out for you, put you in an easier place, that it may be well with you. Now, is not Boaz, with whom servant girls you've been working, a relative of ours? In fact, tonight he is whinnying barley on the threshing floor. Therefore, wash yourself, put on perfume, and wear your best clothes. Go down the threshing floor, but do not let the men know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lays down on the threshing floor, and note the place where he lays, and then go in and uncover his feet and lay down, and he will explain to you what to do next. Obviously, this is a cultural thing that on the surface, I had no idea what in the world she's telling him to do and why to do this. But we see a discretion here. Again, a woman of integrity. Every one of us, regardless of gender, we need to be people of integrity. And we have a wonderful example of Ruth following instructions, not arguing, and then doing it accurately. Verse 5, "I will do everything you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did exactly what her mother-in-law had instructed her to do. After Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, so perhaps some of the drinking was a bit of the fermented type, we see that he's in a good mood. He's relaxed. Obviously, a good harvest, he's in a good mood. He went to lay down at the end of the heap of grain, and then Ruth went in secretly and uncovered his feet and laid down. I wonder if Ruth even knew what she was doing, but she's following instructions. At midnight, Boaz was startled, turned over, and there laying at his foot was a woman. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she replied. "Spread the cover of your garment over me, for you are a kinsman redeemer." We see here, I think, something more than just worried about, physical chill of the night. We see here he knows what she's putting down, a proposition. And this is not a proposition of anything other than redemption. And you think about, she's putting a lot of trust and confidence in Naomi's instructions. What about us? Do we not put a lot of trust and confidence in Jesus Christ? Do we see this story so much mimicking the wave sheaf offering, mimicking Jesus Christ? Verse 10, "Then Boaz said, 'May the Lord bless you, my daughter. You have shown more kindness than before, because you have not run after the younger men, which, whether rich or poor.'" In other words, we see a character trait here in Ruth. She's looking for content of character, not charisma, not what's on the outside. We gather Boaz perhaps is a little bit older. Maybe he wasn't the best looking individual. He was obviously a nobleman, we know that, but there were probably younger, richer guys, maybe more like her age, but we see she's looking for content of character, not charisma. Verse 11. Now, do not be afraid, my daughter. I will do whatever you request, since my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Obviously, this is something that has been shown. She's demonstrated character. Yes, it is true that I am a kinsman redeemer, but there is a redeemer nearer than I. Stay here tonight, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem you, good. Let him redeem you. But if he does not want to redeem you, as surely as the Lord lives, I will. Now lie there until morning. So she laid down at his feet until morning, and she got up before anyone else could recognize her. And then Boaz said, do not let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. And so he told her, bring the shawl you were wearing and hold it out. And when she did, he poured in 6 measures of barley and placed it on her. And then he went into the city. And then Ruth returned to her mother-in-law Naomi and asked her, how did it go, my daughter? And then Ruth told her all that Boaz had done for her. And she said, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, for he said, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Wait, my daughter, Naomi said, until you find out how things go, for he will not rest unless he has resolved the matter today. And again, we see here Boaz, a person who is living within the laws of the land. He's going to, even though he probably would see somebody perhaps younger, nicer looking than him, jump at the chance, no, he's going to do it the right way. He's not going to short circuit the system. He's not going to maneuver. He's going to do it and let it play out the right way. And of course, when we do things the right way, we know God will acknowledge and God will make sure that it's done correctly. You know, the fact that we see here as well, Jesus Christ, when a matter has started, he finishes it, just like Boaz, just like Naomi saying, he's going to see it through. He is not going to leave you hanging, so to speak. He's not going to play games. He is going to see this through, but do it the right way. Again, something for us to consider. Going on to chapter 4 here in Ruth, we see here, meanwhile, Boaz went to the gates and sat down there. Soon the kinsman redeemer of whom he had spoken came along, and Boaz said, come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down, and then Boaz took 10 of the elders of the city and said, sit down, and they did. He's doing it right, legal, up front, no, working things behind the scenes. And he said to his kinsman redeemer, Naomi, who has returned from the land of Moab, is selling a piece of land that belongs to our brother Elimelech. I thought that I should inform you that you may buy it back in the presence of those seated here, in the presence of the elders of my people. If you want to redeem it, do so. If you will not redeem it, tell me, so that I may, because there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you. I will redeem it, he replied. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, and also from Ruth the Moabite, you must also acquire the widow of the deceased in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. And the kinsman redeemer replied, I cannot redeem it myself, or I would jeopardize my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption, because I cannot redeem it. So the first right of refusal went to this individual. This individual declined, but everything's done up front. There's no, like so many times happens in our society, in our world, when somebody dies, the worst in everybody else comes out. The vultures come out, and they're looking for what they can get. That is not Boaz. Character trait, something we can learn. Verse 7, now in the former times in Israel concerning the redemption of an exchanged property, to make a matter legally binding, a man would remove his sandal and give it to the other party, and this was a confirmation in Israel. So the kinsman redeemer removed his sandal and said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. I have no idea why they used that methodology, but it's what they did. Continuing on, Verse 9, at this time Boaz said to the elders of all the city, you are witnesses today that I am buying from Naomi all that belongs to Elimelech, Chelon, and Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's wife, as my wife, to raise up the name of the deceased through his inheritance, so that his name will not disappear from among his brothers or from the gate of this town. You are witnesses today. That rings so much with God talking to Israel, the blessings and curses. This is witness to you today. Make a choice, and it's being certified. Verse 11, you are witnesses, said the elder, we are witnesses rather, said the elders to all the people in the gates. May the Lord make the woman entering into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. And may you prosper in Ephraim and famous, or become famous in Bethlehem. We know he would through David. We know he would through Jesus. And may your house become like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore for Judah, because of the offspring the Lord will give you by this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he had had relations with her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. I oftentimes think about that, and I wonder, was she barren before with a previous husband? And we know in that society, that was a terrible thing from the standpoint of just the socioeconomics of it. And yet, God can open wombs, just like he did with so many other women in history. Verse 11, or 14, then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a kinsman redeemer. May his name become famous in Israel, and he will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. That reminds me of a statement. I don't know if I should say this or not, but Leanne had one of her grandmothers and said, let me tell you something. A daughter's worth more than a nickel of a son. Just kind of reminds me of that. Verse 16, and Naomi took the child and placed him on her lap and began to nurse to him. And the neighbor's woman said, a son has been born to Naomi. And then they named him Obed. He became a father of Jesse in the house of David. And, of course, it continues on with the genealogy through the genealogy of Perez in verse 18. And it goes all the way through to Boaz was the father of Obed, Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. So we see that Ruth was the grandmother of David. You know, there's so many things here, again, when we talk about this story. It fits within the season and the time that we're in right now, but we see that Ruth was a foreigner, she was Moabite, she was an alien, she was a stranger. But she adapted to the ways of the people. She assimilated into their society. And so much more, she also assimilated into what the ways of God, because their God became her God. It was not her bringing the gods of Moab into Israel. Huge delineation, huge difference than what we've seen even in our own country. And I take from that on a personal level, it is very important for you and I to not bring in our gods into this relationship, our ideas and conceptions of things. It's important for us to let God be our God, not our ideas, not the ideas of other men and other people. We already referenced some of this in Ephesians, but it is important to see that with this story, there is the connection to the true characters. The characters of, when we look in Galatians 6:16, it's neither circumcision that's anything or uncircumcision, but a new creation. And that new creation comes by how we walk in the way. We walk in the rule. We walk in the peace, and we become the Israel of God. That's how Gentiles are viewed by God when they follow the example of Ruth. And the alien in the midst from the very beginning was to be like that. So when we think about applications to our lives, I have just a couple of things here. Obviously, Romans 15:4 says, For whatever was written in earlier times was written for our instruction, so that through perseverance and the encouragement of Scriptures, we might have hope. This is truly a story of hope. Yes, for the dire straits that Naomi and Ruth lived in, but also a story of hope that played out during the season of the barley harvest that led to the wheat harvest, the wave sheaf offering that led to what's opened up to us as a result of the hope we have of eternal life. You know, God is very concerned about all people, regardless of their race, regardless of their nationalities, or even their gender or their status. Men and women are equal, importantly, to God. You know, you even think about Jesus making this reference because the Pharisees or the Sadducees were bringing up this individual that died and went through 7 brothers. And who was going to be the wife in the resurrection? Well, the irony of that was they didn't even believe in resurrections, but they just showed you the disingenuousness of their question. But in God's eyes, you know, Jesus said it's neither male nor female in the kingdom of heaven. So there is an equal importance there. And we see here that it's not as say here, there's no such thing as an unimportant person in God's eyes. You know, here's Naomi, a foreigner, and yet she's been given a great deal, Ruth, a foreigner, been given a great deal of redemption and attention. God uses little things sometimes to articulate grand things. And I think the story of Ruth is a grand articulation of the events that embody the Redeemer that's there to rescue us from our sins and our dire states. So I hope we spend some time, maybe go back and reread it, think through, meditate on this story. There is a lot for us to learn about the story of Ruth.